Hi, welcome to Goodnight, Mr. Holmes, a podcast about the Granada Sherlock Holmes, which ran on ITV in the UK between 1984 and 1994, and ran on Masterpiece Mystery in the US around the same time. I'm Laura.
And I'm Rachel.
Today, we're looking at episode 4 in the series, which is called The Solitary Cyclist. And we open
a bit of a misnomer because the problem is that she's not.
Yes, it's not solitary. Yeah. Typical Arthur Conan Doyle. So the show opens on the English countryside, which is apparently in Surrey, where a woman is riding a bicycle along a winding lane.
And she's not wearing a split skirt.
Exactly.
Which, yeah. If it were me, my skirts would get tangled up in the pedals and wheels, and I'd be falling over like every 5.
And there is one little scene where she hops off the bike in front of the manor house, and her skirt is a little bit caught, and she has to
miss that. Yeah, that'd be me.
Yeah. So she's riding this bike along a winding lane in a beautiful countryside, and there's a mysterious man hiding behind a bush or someplace along the side of the road, and he's checking his pistol to make sure it's fully loaded. And then he hops on his own bike and he begins to follow her. And then threatening music starts. So that tells us this is a bad situation. And then we're back at 221B, where the bicycling woman props her bike up against the wall and looks up at the windows.
And then she just leaves her bike, which is, you can tell we're not in New York City because that bike would have been stolen within like 2 minutes.
Or even modern day London. But yeah, people did, do that. They would just throw their bike, somewhere and then go back and get it. Back in the day. Holmes and Watson are inside 221B, and Holmes is showing Watson how he's about to solve a case using his chemical titrations. At which point, Mrs. Hudson interrupts.
Yeah, it's a chemical reaction that will dictate the fate of, I don't know, some guy, a tobacco millionaire. Watson asks if he should take notes. Holmes says, "No, I will dictate in the fullness of time," which is another flat out lie because we never do find out about it.
Exactly. So Mrs. Hudson says, there's a young, persistent lady who wants to see him named Violet Smith. And Holmes replies, he's also persistent, especially when he's working. But the young lady pops around from behind Mrs. Hudson and tells him it's urgent.
And he just stares at her like, why is she here? Why?
Right. And I also got a wave of how impertinent.
Yes. Like, I thought you said this was a lady, a gentlewoman.
Right. But he's also intrigued.
And Watson is intrigued because she's very pretty. Exactly.
Yes, typical Watson. So Holmes notes, he does his whole Holmes thing.
But one of the things I noticed, Mrs. Hudson leaves. Watson tries to usher Violet to a chair, and she's like, "No, I'm fine over here," like standing halfway across the room.
Right. Yeah, that was unusual.
Mm-hmm.
So she's a woman who knows her own mind, I guess.
She does. She's also, I think, aware that she's a woman alone in a room with two men whom she doesn't know.
Exactly. Yes, and she can only rely on Holmes's reputation as a gentleman.
Yeah, and Holmes addresses her as Miss Smith, like if that is your real name, kind of tone of
But he does this whole X-ray thing and notes that she's an avid bicyclist. And then Watson's like, "Oh, because of her shoes," which Holmes is like, "Yeah, that's exactly right." And then he further
the sides are worn, and not that she's wearing bicycles.
Right.
But like the soles are worn because of pedals or whatever.
Yeah. And then notes her spatulate fingers Like, ew. But he says, you're not a typist because you have a spiritual face.
Yeah, hear that, novelists? You don't show any spirituality.
So she must be a musician. So she confirms that she's a music teacher, and tells them that her father was a conductor. But when he died,
The old Imperial.
the old Imperial, yes, the theater.
Yeah, no explanation or anything, just old Imperial Holmes. And
Well, actually, the one thing that the annotated Sherlock Holmes does point out is that that theater was actually leased to Lily Langtry around this time. So the old Imperial had been one thing, and then when Lily Langtry started there, it was another thing.
Oh,
yeah.
So they were being nostalgic for what it was before.
Exactly. Yes. And when her father died, she and her mother were left alone, apart from an Uncle Ralph who went to Africa 15 years ago. And she says the uncle has all but disappeared. She and her mother have been very poor since then. And until very recently, there was an ad in the newspaper asking for information about where they lived.
Mm-hmm.
So Violet goes to the legal office of the firm that had placed the ad and was introduced to a Mr. Carruthers and a Mr. Woodley, who kisses her hand and just seems generally, ugh.
Yeah, he's also got a mustache that's so big and bushy that I thought it was fake. Like, you know, the mustache itself is probably fake, but like the character was wearing a fake mustache.
Yes, yes.
It looks like he's got a caterpillar smashed to his upper lip.
And they're from South Africa. Mr. Carruthers is played by John Castle, who plays Inspector Craddock in the Miss Marple series.
Okay, I thought he looked familiar.
Yeah. But he's also well known, apparently, I didn't know this, but IMDb told me, for taking roles of unscrupulous characters. So when
I wonder if that has any relevance to our story.
I don't know. He says that while her uncle died in poverty, he has a proposition for her. He's a widower. He has a 10-year-old daughter. He offers her £100 a year, and she says yes.
And Holmes notes that £100 a year is double the market price.
Yes.
Future.
And the whole time, Mr. Woodley is doing like these weird interjections and leering at her.
Oh, he's so gross.
And puffing on his cigar and generally behaving in an uncouth manner. He's not a gentleman.
No. Also wearing plaid, isn't he?
Yes, but
I mean, it was probably an accepted thing, but it just
stood out.
Yeah. Because
Carruthers is dressed in dark clothes.
Yeah.
And looks very well put together. He's quite handsome.
Yes.
Carruthers' house is called Chilton Grange, and it's one of these big manor estates. And his daughter,
built in brick to keep the peasants from burning it down.
Yes. His daughter's name is Sarah, and she's a very good pupil, and she's a delight, and Violet loves her. And Violet goes home to London every weekend to see her mother. And one day, Mr. Woodley shows.
One day something happens, and Holmes guesses Mr. Woodley shows up, an unexpected guess, something like that.
Yes.
And Violet says something like, "Oh, what a lucky guess," or something along the lines. And Holmes says, "I never guess."
Right.
Let's put a pin in that too.
Yes, exactly. So Woodley shows up to stay for a week, and Violet really hates him. And he won't stop ogling her. Like a cartoon, you know? Like the Awooga eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And they're sitting, I guess it's after dinner because it didn't look like there were plates.
Yeah, I know they were all just staring at, maybe they were waiting for
I don't know.
Just to show up, but they're all just sitting there silently.
And the maid comes in and says to Carruthers, there's someone at the door, you got to go see. And when Carruthers leaves, Woodley closes the door.
And stands in front of it so that she can't leave.
Right. And he begins to come on to her. And she asks him to leave her alone.
He blows smoke in her face. He's got a cigar.
Oh, yes, that's right.
He blows smoke in her face. She says, hey, could you not do that? He says, when women say they wish you wouldn't do something, they generally mean the opposite. I guess he thinks that means she likes having smoke blown in her face.
Yes. Now that's always just a reason to keep doing what you're doing because you want to do it as a man. And she asks him to leave her alone, and he refuses.
He proposes.
Yes, asks her to marry him, says he can give her anything, diamonds.
He's like kind of supposedly looking at her neck, like diamond jewelry, diamond necklace kind of thing. She's wearing a low-cut gown. He's much more just staring at her breasts.
Yes. He's creepy, like from top to bottom.
Oh, he's
just the epitome of creepy.
Yeah. She says, obviously, she says, no, I'm not going to marry you.
And he does the thing again.
Yeah. And he's like, all right, well, listen, how about you just give me a kiss instead? And he's holding her so that she can't leave. She says no. And stop it. He says, I told you about women who say stop it. The more they struggle, the more fun it is. So he's basically saying, hey, I'm a rapist.
Exactly. Yes.
This episode really should be subtitled, Why Women Choose the Bear.
Yes, exactly. Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, this is where the issue of consent comes in, into this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Female consent.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and it's really, it's interesting because this is Conan Doyle being slightly ahead of his time.
Mm-hmm.
And feminist. To some degree.
Yeah, well, I mean, in his writing, at least, whether himself was or not is something. But it's very interesting given the times.
Exactly. Yes. So Carruthers comes in and sees this, and he tries to pull Woodley off of her, and Woodley socks him in the face. And Carruthers tells him to get out, and Woodley insults both of them by calling them old.
Yeah, I'm not interested in old maids.
Right. And he leaves.
Huh.
And Carruthers tells her this won't happen again because Woodley isn't welcome there anymore, and asks if she'll stay on, and she says yes.
I would have added the caveat if he's never allowed inside this house again. Okay. But
right.
Sure.
So Violet's telling Holmes that Carruthers has shown a great deal of interest in me. He's a perfect gentleman and hasn't said anything. And she's already engaged to a man named Cyril Morton, who's an electrical engineer.
Yeah, which is not something you need to remember.
No. Holmes says that while she seems frightened, she can obviously take care of herself. So what's the problem?
Yeah, like, why are you here? I was doing something.
At which point she says to Holmes that another cyclist is following her. Every Saturday, she bikes to the train to go see her mother, and then every Monday when she cycles back. And she takes her bike on the train. She does mention that.
Yeah. I liked that detail. I always hated people who did that on subways.
I know.
They're taking up so much space.
Yeah, but then they don't have to worry about transport once they get off the train.
Yeah, true.
Every time she slows down, the guy behind her does the same. Every time she stops, he does the same. And she describes him. He's a middle-aged man wearing dark clothes. He's wearing sunglasses and has a huge beard.
Yeah, it's clearly a disguise.
Yes. So she stops suddenly at a sharp bend in the road near another manor house named Charlington Hall. And she waits for him to come cruising by. But He doesn't. She said he seemed like he disappeared completely. At which point, Holmes asks about Carruthers. He's a wealthy man, but he doesn't have any horses or carriages.
Yeah, apparently he had said something about he was ordering a trap and horses
Right.
to take her to and from the train station, but they hadn't arrived yet. So the point being, if he was wealthy, he'd already have all of the stuff.
Exactly. But he does refer to his gold shares from time to time. So it's clear he's got some money. So things are just weird. So after Violet leaves, Holmes confirms that she's in danger, and he sends Watson to the country.
Yeah. When we get to the Hound of the Baskervilles, remember this episode.
Yes, exactly. So Watson waits at the bend in the road. He hides behind some.
Well, so they've sketched out the area. You've got this road. There's just barren grass, with this little stick pile in the middle of it, and on the other side, it's heavily wooded.
Right.
Watson is supposed to lie in wait. So where does he choose to hide?
That one
in the woods where he's got movement and can see things and maybe no, he hides behind the sticks in the middle of nowhere, set far back from the woods,
right,
from the road. And then he stands up,
right, because how else is he supposed to see above the pile of sticks? And so he watches as Violet passes by, and the male cyclist begins to follow her, and then Violet, interestingly, tries to confront him. She turns her bike around.
Yeah, I loved this.
And now she's chasing him.
Yes.
To the bend in the road. And then she turns back around and goes to Chiltern Grange. Mm-hmm. And then the man's following her again. And he gets off his bicycle at the same spot where he'd originally been hiding. And he takes off his sunglasses. And he goes down
the bike there. Yeah.
Yeah, he hides the bike, and he goes down the path in the woods towards Charlington Hall. And Watson starts to follow him on foot, but then he finds a sign for an estate agent that's been kind of buried or obscured, and the name Williamson as the tenant in the house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he goes to the office and gets the name of the tenant. And then Watson's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day.
Yes, because when he gets back, all proud of himself that he's got all this information, Holmes says he did a terrible job, and he really lays into him.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it goes on for a while.
Yeah, really have done remarkably badly.
Chapter and verse.
Mm-hmm.
And poor Watson's completely demoralized.
I know. I really do remarkably badly. Yes.
And Holmes says he should have tried the nearest pub because that's where all the gossip is.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, the two of them get a note from Violet that Carruthers has proposed marriage. And Holmes is like, all right, we have to go together.
No, he's going alone. Watson.
That's right. That's right.
And Holmes says, no, that will be neither useful nor necessary.
That's right. Yes. And so Watson says, you should stop at the pub. That's where all the information is. And Holmes snaps back at him. And at that point, I'm like, you guys are just two little bitches. So the next scene is the pub. And we watch a very drunken, a priest, because he's got the rosary on.
Clergyman, yeah. Elderly clergyman.
Leaving on a horse.
Getting on a horse very badly. Needs
help.
So
drunk. He's so drunk.
The boy who helps him, who I guess is attached to the pub, is just looking at him like, oh my God.
He's sad. Yeah. And Holmes strides in the front door wearing his deerstalker and spats. And orders a half pint of ale and overtips the publican in exchange.
Good afternoon, landlord. May I have half a pint of your local ale, please? I am just like you, good country folk who do not dwell in the city.
And he gives the publican a gold coin, and the publican says, I've done nothing to earn this. And he says, well, kind of like you're about to.
Yeah. You can answer some questions. I'm not one for idle gossip, sir. Nor am I, Holmes says in a clear lie.
Yes. He loves nothing more than idle gossip. And he asks,
follows the gossip pages in the newspaper.
right, and yes, the agony aunt.
Yeah.
He asks about Williamson, the tenant at Charlington Hall, and we find out he is the drunken priest.
Yeah, is he an elderly, respectable gentleman? The landlord says, "Oh, he's elderly."
But he's not a priest anymore. He was struck off. And that he has folk up at his house on the weekends. And
a warm lot.
A warm lot. If you get too close to them, you'll burn.
Yeah.
And one of them in particular is especially warm. And we guess that it's Woodley, who happens to be creeping up behind Holmes at the pub and is clearly drunk. So Holmes remarks to the publican that Woodley's clearly not a gentleman. At which point Woodley punches Holmes.
Well, he says, I'm as much a gentleman as you are. Lies, that's another one. Yeah, he hits Holmes, who staggers so theatrically, like all the way across the room.
Yes. And then announces, once he gets himself standing up again, he announces to the room he's about to act in self-defense. And this is extremely theatrical.
Oh my God. He starts this little dance step, and all you see are his feet, which make me question whether that was actually Jeremy Brett, or possibly the director is just hinting that this is just such bizarre behavior. Everybody is mesmerized. Like, what the hell are you doing? And he's rotating his fists.
Yes.
Constantly. Great form. Cobra Kai is going to recruit him any second.
It is really, I mean, I could not stop laughing at this scene. But he proceeds to beat Woodley up in a gentlemanly fashion.
Yes.
With the right side of his fist. And Woodley is basically thrown by the force of Holmes's punches onto a table, and everyone in the pub claps. And
as does the audience.
Back at 221B, he tells Watson it was absolutely delicious. And that Woodley was taken home in a cart. And Holmes is nearly cackling at this point. He just, reveling in it. And then Woodley shows up at the gates of Chiltern Grange, and he's all bloodied and bruised. So it's probably like immediately after this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets into an argument with Carruthers. But Carruthers, even though Violet sees this happen and she asks Carruthers about it, he says that Woodley's not allowed in the house. But Violet, I guess she's had enough because she writes to Holmes that she's
yeah, I mean, if I were her, I'd be like, okay, but I don't stay inside your house 24/7.
Right.
I bicycle back and forth between the station. I don't want to meet this guy on the way there.
Exactly. So she's like, I'm leaving. And she's not going to be bicycling to the train station because by this time the horse and trap have arrived at Carruthers' house. So
they will be there tomorrow. Tomorrow, all her troubles will be at an end.
Oh, yes.
And Watson's like, you hear that, Holmes? Tomorrow, all her troubles will be at an end. And Holmes is like, yeah, I'm kind of wondering about that word.
Right. Trap. So Violet watches the driver pack up the trap with her things. And meanwhile, the mysterious man with the pistol is checking his gun again. Violet gets into the trap and is being driven. Holmes and Watson have meanwhile come out there, and they're on a nearby path. And Holmes has brought his revolver.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out Violet's taking an earlier train than Holmes thought. And by the time they reach the horse and trap, both the driver and Violet are gone. And Holmes says, abduction, murder.
Yeah, we the audience see the trap stopping and Violet screams. We don't see why. We cut to Holmes and Watson on the road, on a different part of the road, and then the horse comes running around a corner towards them,
Yes.
with nobody in the carriage, clearly panicked, and Watson, stops the horse and calms it down.
And then they
Poor
commandeer
horsey.
Yeah. I know. I felt bad for that horse. And Watson doesn't calm the horse down in a like peaceful way. He just grabs the horse.
Yeah, he like stands in front of the horse and like waving his arms for it to stop, which it
Of
does.
course, the horse
He like wraps his arms around it in a hug until it's okay. I'm pretty sure that's not how you do it, but sure.
No. Like he's not taking the reins or anything like that. But they get into the trap, and Holmes is steering, and they hurry towards Charlington Hall.
They stop at the path in the woods.
Yes, they stop at that little intersection where the path towards Charlington Hall starts, and the mysterious bearded cycling man comes up to them, panicked. And they find the driver of the trap knocked down on the ground. Watson says he's okay. He's, heartbeat, breathing, everything's fine. So the three of them rush off as they hear Violet screaming. And we still don't know who this cycling man is.
Right.
And why Holmes is like,
I thought it was
run around with him.
Yeah.
Because he's like supposed to be the enemy.
Right.
And as they come into a clearing and a little sort of, what is it called? Gazebo. The priest is in the gazebo, and he's reading out the marriage vows.
Yeah, we're in that scene from The Princess Bride. He's knowledge. She's gagged and bound.
Yes, she's gagged. Although
by not Carruthers. Woodley.
By Woodley. He's in the act of forcing marriage at gunpoint and using the defrocked drunken priest. So the priest finishes, Violet faints. It seems like it's done, and she's married to this man. The bearded cycling man rips off his disguise. It's Carruthers, and he shoots Woodley.
Yeah, it looks like he was aiming for the crotch, but later see blood on Woodley's chest.
Like right below his shoulder. At which point, Holmes takes all the guns.
Yes.
Because the priest had one too. And dispatches the now recovered driver to the police, and he herds everyone into Charlington Hall.
They carry Woodley to the house, like one guy's holding him under the arms, another's carrying his legs. Like this, they've got a trap with a horse, but there's somebody with a chest wound. That's the best way to carry them.
And then Holmes is downstairs with Carruthers and the priest, and Watson comes down from upstairs and says that Woodley will recover, at which point Carruthers wants to get up and end him.
As do we.
Yes. And Violet is also doing okay. And Carruthers says, yeah, but she's married to Woodley now. As if that's as bad as death.
It probably is.
Yeah. But Holmes says that Williamson, the priest, is illegitimate because he's been defrocked, and the forced marriage is a felony. And so this note in the annotated Sherlock Holmes specifies that, Williamson says, once a clergyman, always a clergyman, but in the Anglican Church, the act of marriage is predicated on intention and consent by the participants. So, and unlike any other sacrament, the priest in solemnizing holy matrimony as practiced in the Church of England is not the minister of the rite. The bride and groom themselves are its ministers. So her consent is essential for the marriage to be valid. And without
there were no I do's.
Without her consent, it's an invalid marriage. So that's, again, it's another.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I love that. And to further the issue of consent, Holmes begins to relate the overall scam that's going on. That back in South Africa,
Yes,
Violet's
yes, they all met in South Africa,
yes,
which the clergyman says wrong, and Carruthers confirms it. Holmes
yeah,
never guesses.
right. He was wrong. Um, Back in South Africa, Violet's uncle was ill and wouldn't live long. And
Well, just he was. What they say was he was. Um, the phrasing isn't close to death, but it's something like known to not live much longer or something. The story was published in 1903, so this is probably a reference to the Second Boer War.
right, okay, so maybe he'd been attacked in some way.
Yeah, so possibly. So the Second Boer War, Britain had territories in the southern part of South Africa and wanted to expand up the east coast. The Boers, who were themselves descendants of Dutch colonists and had been living independently for a while, didn't really want that.
Yeah,
Gold had been discovered there in the 1880s. So, aside from wanting more of South Africa, the Brits also wanted gold.
well, it wasn't just gold. It was, I mean, there was all kinds of like,
Yeah.
I mean, we think about Elon Musk's father's emerald mines. There's diamonds. There's just tons of natural
things to exploit.
Yes.
The British ultimately won by devastating the area and putting thousands of Boers into concentration camps.
Right. That's when Kitchener these concentration camps. That's why we no longer use the term Kitchener stitch in knitting.
I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, no, it's from him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Side note, if you're setting up concentration camps, you're probably not on the side of the good guys.
Yep.
So it kind of sounds like they might all have been involved in the Boer War, or at least her uncle was.
Yes.
They might have been among the civilians who, Woodley and Carruthers might have been among the civilians who came in to try to get some of the gold that had been discovered there.
Yes, there's always hangers-on and profiteers during a war.
Yeah, I believe he would not live long.
And that she would inherit his fortune but he was illiterate. So there was no will. So Carruthers and Woodley, and the uncle's still alive at this point, decide to steal the money by marrying her to Woodley. But Carruthers fell in love with her. And so he wanted to stop the scheme while Woodley...
It was the first time he ever knew what love was. They asked him, why didn't you tell her the danger she was in?
Yeah.
She would have left me. Like, that's okay. You still don't know what love is.
And then he says something really interesting about like possession. Aren't possession and love the same? And Watson's like, no.
No, they are not.
He says it wasn't love, but selfishness. So Carruthers was trying to protect her from being abducted by Woodley by riding behind her, the whole time. And then a telegram arrives and says that the uncle has finally died.
Well, Watson reads that old man is dead, and Watson is confused about this could possibly be referring to, because he has not been paying attention at all.
Right.
This is like Ralph Smith, the uncle. Oh, right. The conversation we've been having. Gotcha.
And once that telegram came, Woodley asked Carruthers to stick to the scheme. And that's when he showed up at the gates again. And Carruthers said no. And Holmes asks why Woodley was chosen as the husband. And Carruthers tells him they played cards for her.
True love.
Woodley one. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, yeah, consent versus possession. Then we're back at 221B. And Watson's coming in flourishing a newspaper, about to tell Holmes the results of the trial. And Holmes very slyly kind of pushes the drawer closed that contains his hypodermic needle and Watson's checkbook.
Yeah, his hair is slightly messy, so we know he's not in a great frame of mind. And then he says, "May I be permitted an educated guess from Holmes?"
Another guess.
To be fair, this isn't a guess, but
No, and he guesses correctly. And
he gets 10 years. Williamson, the clergyman, gets 7. Carruthers, due to Holmes's elegant speech at the trial, gets 6 months. Watson's like, "My God, Holmes, how did you know?" And I'm watching this thinking, he's probably already read the paper. And that's basically what Holmes says. I sent up for an early edition.
And Violet is married to her engineer. She's very wealthy, and she's looking after Carruthers' daughter while Carruthers is in prison. And then they go back to the experiment that Holmes was running when Violet interrupted them.
I feel like they had plenty of time to do it before now, but
I know, but yeah, it's TV. And it turns out to be so smelling and foul.
yeah, it pours smoke. Smoke is pouring out from under their door.
In the window. So they're hanging
Yeah,
up.
they open up the windows and are coughing outside.
And then we see the fire brigade coming.
Yeah. Is that the answer, Holmes? Yeah, that's the answer. They arrived so quickly that they must have already been on their way. Oh, God.
Yes.
He's doing his experiments again.
Like maybe they have a fire brigade just sort of on ice whenever.
Yeah.
He fires up the Bunsen burner. So yeah, this was super interesting, not for the South African intrigue, which as usual.
Although it was such a delicate reference, discreet reference.
Yes.
In the show that when I looked it up, I was kind of astonished at just how much information they were hinting at, how much backstory.
Well, I guess because it would have been in everybody's minds at the time the story was published. So it's, these sort of references wouldn't have needed any deep dives back in 1903. But yeah, I mean, there is a ton of history there, for sure. And very convoluted history.
Yeah.
And I mean, but what was interesting to me is that he treats Africa in the same way that he treats America. Conan Doyle. Like, it's a far off place
where you go and get rich. Stuff happens.
Yeah, you have adventures, and then
yeah, Conan Doyle. Really, I guess we should be grateful he didn't turn this into a novel, because then we'd have chapters of really boring
of Mormons or whatever the South African equivalent is. But I really loved, Violet as this sort of, at the time, independent minded kind of person, where she's not a limp little flower. As beautiful as she is, she's got a sense of herself as someone of value.
Yeah.
And
she's looking for validation.
Right. And she's not going to bestow herself on just anybody. She loves her engineer, and these jokers are first like a bother and then a threat.
And she goes and does something about it.
Yeah, she gets Holmes. Oh God, just that scene where Holmes is chastising Watson. I'm just coming back to that as like, if either of us talk to one another.
Oh my God.
I mean, Watson's the one with no spine. Watson's the one.
Yeah, really.
Because if Holmes had talked to her that way, she would have just walked right out the door.
Exactly.
God, men. Yeah.
So, oh, go on.
The only thing, sort of prototypical that Violet does is faint when she's being married, which, I might too, because she's bound and gagged and has a gun at her head.
Yeah. You're marrying this man who's basically said, yeah, I rape women.
Right. Yep. What were you going to say?
So I was going to go into a bit of a deep dive on cycling.
Okay, let's do that.
So cycling became popular among middle and upper class women in the late 18th century. And kind of as a result of that, or partly as a result of that, women's clothing became an issue. Like we were talking about earlier, skirts and petticoats would get tangled up in the bike, which could lead to crashes. According to an article in The Guardian, newspapers of the time routinely published stories of death and disfigurement due to these crashes. Like, it's a bike. I mean, you're wearing 40 pounds of head-to-toe clothing. Of course, you're going to be injured if you crash because your skirts got tangled. But you're not going to die or be disfigured.
Well, if you're wearing a whalebone corset, those can be sharp. So you might.
You might. I still have a hard time picturing just, you're just falling a couple of feet sideways.
Yes, that's true.
So my guess is that the newspapers were on an anti-women riding bicycles campaign.
Well, what's changed? Look at the Daily Mail. Look at the Sun. I mean, misogyny has been rampant through British newspapers. Well, in media.
This is a bit of a tangent, but there's been a lot of talk lately about the ethics of true crime.
Yes.
It had been observed that the primary consumers of true crime were women, and that's what got this whole conversation started, which, there are ethical considerations in, true crime consumption and especially true crime journalism, but it really just strikes me, true crime, there's a long history of this, centuries. This wasn't only women who engaged, men, also used to write and consume ballads, executions, or public events. Nobody seemed concerned about it really until it was noticed that the primary consumers were women. So I think, like the cycling, it's another instance of, hey, women are doing a thing. Let's explore all the ways in which they are wrong to do this.
Yes. And in fact, wasn't there a theory that the reason women were so into true crime is because it's a how-to manual on how not to get into those situations?
I think there are tons of reasons that
are cathartic as hell.
Also, again, it's not just women. So
right. Yes, but I mean, if you look at things like, oh God, what is it? In the A's, there were all these financial true crime books, Barbarians at the Gate, Liars, and that was for men.
Yeah.
But if it involves bodies and relationships, it's women's problems.
So bicycles became part of women's liberation. In 1897, a group of men in Cambridge held an effigy of a woman on a bicycle, like out a window of the crowd here. They were protesting the proposal to let women attend the college.
And the bicycle was the wow.
Yeah, was the symbol of women. In 1895, I'm quoting from another Guardian article, the British writer Louise Jeye, Jeye, I don't know how it's pronounced, wrote, "There is a new dawn of emancipation, and it is brought about by the cycle. Free to wheel, free to spin out in the glorious country, unhampered by chaperones. The young girl of today can feel the real independence of herself, and while she is building up her better constitution, she is developing her better mind."
Yeah. And one thing Holmes does note is that Violet is clearly exercising. She's fit.
Yeah.
from all the biking.
Her
And
face is pink.
that's another, method of independence for women is, not being these frail creatures that need men looking
Right.
after them. They can bike long distances and be fine
Mm-hmm.
by themselves.
Yes. So it seems like the big issue was the saddle of the bike because that had sexual connotations. So,
It would. It
the
would.
bicycles were modified so that the center was cut out. Doctors invented medical problems. So there
Wow.
was kind of sort of a general anti-women riding bicycles push. But to quote Terry Pratchett, because he's always quotable, there's a difference between before and without. Women were not giving up cycling. And it was hard to do in corsets and long skirts. So the clothing began to be modified. Split skirts, bloomers, which had been kind of sneered at for a while, suddenly really became things that women were wearing. So yeah, women didn't really wear underwear much before.
Well, they wore these kind of.
Yeah, but if they did wear bloomers, it was really just two pant legs that were attached by strings. In other words, they were open.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Why? I wonder why.
To make it, because you were wearing these long skirts, I think so when you had to pee, you had to hike up your skirts and petticoats and all of these wire stuff and squat over something, and it was just easier if you didn't have to reach under it and pull something down.
That's farthingales too, like the hoops and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Bustles.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and actually bustles started to go away around this time. Because what we do, sit on a cage on a bike?
Yeah, I noticed she was just wearing a skirt. There wasn't anything but petticoats under it. So bicycles were linked to female suffrage.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. So we were talking about Conan Doyle and feminism, whether, or at least his writing, he's portraying women in a manner that we would consider proto-feminism. Just the fact that he was writing about a female cyclist in 1903 is, and you're supposed to be on her side.
Right.
It's an interesting new woman concept that he was playing with.
Yes. Yes. The new woman was a thing, I guess a term of art being bandied around by the press at that time too. So very cool. I don't know at what point, because I read the biography of Conan Doyle. And there was a point where he was caring for his wife who had tuberculosis, but he had fallen in love with another woman. But he was very he wasn't like Dickens, right? He wasn't going to go have an affair.
And he wasn't going to leave his wife just because she was sick.
Right.
Men, take note.
Yes. I mean, Dickens, oh God, don't even get me started. But
not a good guy.
Yeah, Conan Doyle's pretty upstanding as historical men go. And I'm not surprised at this, but I really like it.
Yeah.
I admire this story a lot for that.
Yeah.
I mean, oh God, the character of Woodley is just whoever that actor is, and I didn't look him up because he didn't look familiar to me, but he did a really good job as
a really good job. The mustache is all I remember. He looked like he was out of Monty Python.
Right. You play jerks really well.
Yes, you do.
But I mean, there are some actors who are really, really good at that, and that's what they do.
Clergyman played perpetual drunk pretty good.
Yes, he did. Oh God, his face. He had teeth like Wallace and Gromit. Oh, there was in the annotated, there was a whole like little sidebar conversation about the surplice that the priest was wearing, because it was like a half surplice and he had thrown it over his tweed suit. So that was another signal that he wasn't the real deal.
I would guess, given his alcoholism, that that's probably how he dressed himself before he was defrocked.
Possibly, yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
no, I'm late. Let me just throw this on.
Or I guess I forget what the right word is. When I was in RCIA, which is the Adult Catholic Education, there was a guest speaker who was a priest who was no longer a priest, and I said something about being defrocked, and he corrected me very sternly. That's not the word. He had
But
fallen.
it's so much fun to say.
While he was a priest, he had fallen in love with a nun, so the two of them ran off together. It was very romantic, very sweet. And apparently he was still qualified to give education. But he really objected to the term defrocked. Yeah. But, clerics come up a lot in Conan Doyle's stories. There's, Holmes dresses up as one in the Irene Adler one. So they're just part of the fabric of English life at the turn of the century. I guess it's because it was a respectable career. So the oldest would inherit, the second would be in the military, and the third would be in the priesthood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other notes on this one? This was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's all that I have.
Okay.
Okay. Well, that's all from us this week. If you've enjoyed the show and want to support us, you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Tell your friends about us. And join us next week when we'll be discussing a crooked man.
They're all crooked.
Especially in this one.
Next week.